Welcome to this segment of Capital Connection with Senator Bill Brady. I'm Senator Bill Brady, and I represent the 44th District of the state of Illinois. Thank you for joining us. In this segment, we're going to visit with Dan Long, who is the head of the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability. Dan's been our guest before, and he does a great job providing information and transparency to not just the legislature. It's a bipartisan commission, a commission on which I served, a commission on which you can gain a lot of information in a very nonpartisan way about facts and figures affecting Illinois' growth, Illinois' economy, Illinois' balance sheet, its income and expenses. But amongst their duties, which include the state employees' insurance program, government closures, and all the data and information that we need, they are also charged with keeping an eye on the state's pension systems. And that hasn't been easy over the last several years. Unfortunately, governors and general assemblies in this state have chosen to pass budgets that didn't fund our pensions and have frankly put at risk the very livelihood of the people who've worked so hard for our state and their future. But I'm pleased to have Dan here. What I try to do is provide, through this show, transparency so that you understand what's going on in your state. And Dan's got, hot off the press, just a new report on the condition of the state pensions. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Senator.
What good news can you tell us about the state pension system today?
Well, there's not a lot of good news. The unfunded liabilities continue to grow, and now are at about $129 billion.
Wow.
And the contribution for FY18 to the state pension system is going to grow just about $1 billion, from $7.9 billion to $8.9 billion, and about $900 million of that's going to come from the general revenue fund. So the pension, if you assume we're going to get about $32 billion in revenues, is taking up about 25%. That pension contribution, 25% of our general revenue fund. In other states, you figure 7%, and we're at 25%. So it continues to put stress, in terms of on the general funds that can't be used for other purposes: education, human services, public safety,
Healthcare. All the things that are
all
important.
of the things, yes.
What got us here, Dan?
Well, I think it's just, you mentioned in your introduction, there's been times in the past where we simply haven't contributed, made the full contribution to the pension systems. And when that happens, of course, they are assuming a rate of return on investments. There's only three sources of revenues into the pension systems: the state contribution, employees' contribution, and investment returns. And some years those have been very good and some years not. But when you don't make the contributions, then you can't invest that money to get your, what now they've all lowered it to about 7%. It used to be 8.5 several years ago, and now it's down to 7. And then the law that was passed in 95 to get us to 90% by 2045, by design, we're not contributing the actuarial amount that's required to fully fund, you take care of the unfunded liability and the normal cost. That doesn't happen until like 2032. So by statute, the way the law is written, we continue each year to underfund the pensions. That's by design.
So the history is that the 1970 Constitution, which was put forth through a constitutional convention, prescribed that the state pension systems could not be reduced. The state had an obligation. Since that time, this shortfall of over $129 billion, which has got to be 50% or more, are we less than 50% funded?
Yeah, we're at right now. I think you're right around 39%.
And these are the pensions that affect members of the General Assembly, judges, teachers, state university employees, and state employees.
Correct.
Are at risk at their very livelihood. Would the experts at your commission, would they say that this underfunding is due to the lack of a responsibility on the part of the people who pass the budget, meaning governors and the legislature, or would it be based on the lack of projected investment returns?
It's the single largest contributor to the unfunded liability is the insufficient employer contributions, which is state government.
So what that means is you've got normal cost, which is the year by year share that the employer should put in the system, matching the states.
Right.
And would you say it's over 90% of the problem?
Certainly, yeah, or pretty close to it.
Yeah.
See, the normal cost right now, like I said, the contribution projection for next year is like $8.9 billion. If we were only having to contribute the normal cost, it'd be about $3.5 billion, and that's only about 10% of our budget, as opposed to the 25%. So the vast majority is to take care of problems that have built up.
So those people who want to blame the people in the system, the teachers, the employees, state employees, the state university employees, really it's not their blame. They paid their share into the system. And in fact, a couple of years ago, we passed legislation which diminished future benefits of future employees, which I think will really move. But those people paid in. It's the people who voted for budgets and governors who signed budgets that have really forced the accumulation of this problem.
Correct. Just and like I said, even by design, it's occurred over a long period of time, where we just haven't made the correct contributions to the pension system. You know, in 2002, the unfunded liability was only $35 billion. Now we're at $129 billion. So I mean, it continues to grow, and the state still is not making the full contribution. But that's by design. It's by statute. But there has been times in the past where it was, you know, you paid just 60% of whatever the amount should have been, or 70%, or some arbitrary number. And then over time, like I said, with compound interest also works in reverse. So all of a sudden, you couldn't get those returns, and then we're where we are today.
Well, it's a big problem, and it's one of the reasons that I voted against budgets. And I think any responsible member of the General Assembly and governor wouldn't sign a budget that didn't fund at least that prescription according to law and statute that met that obligation.
And you mentioned Tier 2, which was a significant piece of legislation. In fact, that reduced payments by projected between 2011 and 2014 by $71 billion. It's still defined benefit plan, but certainly those employees that came after 2011 have a reduced benefit.
Well, and when you're less than 40% funded, and you're dependent in the years when you really can't go out and get a job anymore because you're in your retirement years, it really has to be a worry. But we've tried doing some things, and people have called me a pension hawk because I've tried to do things to protect the pensions for those folks, things that would alter it. And to date, the courts have ruled that none of those things can be done. There is one solution that we're still talking about, and that is what we call a swap or an exchange. Senator Cullerton has supported this effort, and that's an effort which would say, if you want a future pay raise to be associated with your pension benefit, then you agree to alter the growth of that benefit, and rather than a 3% compounded COLA, you accept something that's more real or more realistic in terms of actual inflation. That would save us a considerable amount of money and protect the interest of the people who already depended on the system. Do you have an estimate on what that would save?
Yeah, the consideration plan, Senate Bill 1 you mentioned was declared unconstitutional, and that would have saved like $157 billion.
Over a number of years.
And correct. All of this is between now and 2045.
And reduce the contribution significantly.
Consideration
annually.
plan is far less, maybe $10 billion. $15 billion, somewhere in that range.
A little over $1 billion a year.
Yes.
Which is real money.
It's real money, yes.
And something that I know the governor's called on the legislature to take up. I've called on it.
Absolutely.
It's resources, as you said, that we don't have to go toward health insurance or maybe transportation or funding of our schools and property tax relief. And I applaud Senator Cullerton for initiating this. And I think it may be one of the last few areas that the courts, I think, would have to rule on as being constitutional, because we're not taking anything away from anybody. And so it's there. I think one of the other concerns, as we just saw this last year, is two systems had made alterations to either the longevity of their annuitants in terms of extending the likely age, or the investment returns. And those are two factors that do have a cash flow effect. They don't have a normal cost effect, so to speak, if you meet the contribution, but it does increase that normal cost slightly. What were the numbers that we saw come out this last year? I think it was in both TRS and SURS?
No, it was TRS and SERS.
SERS?
SERS hasn't yet. And they, whenever you reduce that assumed rate of return, that has a big impact. Like I said, several years ago they're 8.5%. Now they're both down to 7%. You take that and project it out on a compounded basis to 2045, and that, of course, reduces the amount of money coming in because there's a lot less investment income. Now, it's probably a prudent thing to do. We established that actuary general, and that's one of the things that they had recommended, that maybe the assumed rate of return in this current interest rate environment was too high. So the boards, took that into consideration and reduced that assumed rate of return. That means the state has to contribute a bit more, but I think that if you're not going to make those investment returns, you don't want to keep it artificially high either. And you're right. Every 3 years they look at some of the actuarial assumptions, mortality rates, and retirement age, and those types of things, and adjust those. But clearly, the biggest impact is the reduction in the investment rate of return.
Well, they're both significant factors. When you compound those changes that are likely, and we're glad to see people are living healthier lives and longer lives, we're not necessarily pleased to see actuaries saying the return on those funds will not be what it is, but we want them to be realistic so we can fund these things. And these are huge numbers that are demanding a tremendous amount of resources, and they're not numbers that can be, frankly, successfully dealt with just through budget cuts. We need economic growth. One of the things that you do, as we've talked about before, is you project economic growth, and unless we have economic growth in this state, the revenues are almost going to be, it will almost be impossible for revenues to meet the demand. The economic growth in this state is lagging far behind other states. Wouldn't you agree?
I would, and if you look at some of the national studies, I mean, we're always ranked 38th or something in that range, 35, 38. So it's that's not the only thing that these companies look at, but certainly that's something to take into consideration, and it lets you see where you are, and you're not competing as well as some of these other states for these jobs. And you can just look and see how many manufacturing jobs we've lost over the last decade. I mean, and people that are moving out of the state, which is a real problem. You actually had a decline in the population in the last year.
You're right. We're a net out migration state. More people, unfortunately, are leaving our state than coming in. You provide the data that I know helps my business and other businesses make some decisions on your website. You can get it through the General Assembly website or your website. Where do they go to get your website?
www.cgfa, Commissioner Government Forks Academy.gov. G-O-V.
You can get that stuff. That information.
You can also just Google it.
Shouldn't call it stuff. It's valuable information. You can Google it. But what we've seen is Illinois fall behind. Even some more, what I would consider much more liberal states have made some of the reforms. A gentleman that I've talked to a number of times, Art Laffer, actually does a study with the American Legislative Exchange Council that does a grading of states in terms of how good they are for business growth and economic development and the economic livelihood of our state. And that's another resource I think our listeners should go to see why we know that if we don't have the workplace reforms, the reform agenda that reduces property taxes and fosters growth, reforms our worker compensation system, make it more affordable and beneficial, we're not going to see what we really want to see in this state.
And we come out with a report every year that compares Illinois on various factors, and there's also 4 economic studies. And Art Laffer, that's one of the studies that we summarize in that report. So that.
Well, Dan, thanks for being with us. We're sorry we don't have more time.
Oh, well, thank you, Senator.
But we'll have you on again. And thank you